And to get us started, I will now turn it over to Mr. Eichberger.
Hey guys, I hope everybody's doing well today. It's kind of funny. This is the first time we've done multiple speakers in one of these. I'm sitting here while Donovan's talking and I see windows. I feel like the Brady Bunch. And I'm on mute and I've got all these jokes popping in my head. It's like, okay, looking up at everybody, and it's kind of very kind of strange. It's mute, kind of look like you have a neutral face and everything. Thanks for being here today. I'm very excited about this conversation. I think that we've got a great report coming out, and this is one of the benefits of having a contributor webinar is you're going to see some of the analysis data from our upcoming report before anybody else does. It is data that is being laid out now. The board will approve it here in a couple weeks, and we'll get it published at the end of the month. And then got two friends of mine, Alan and John. These are two individuals who I rely on quite heavily throughout the year to help me better understand the market, what's going on, the trends we're seeing, some of the fundamental reasons why certain things are happening. So having them join us today is a great treat and a great benefit to everybody. The way we're going to run this is I've got slides to walk through, kind of sharing the study we're finalizing now, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A, a discussion with Alan and John, get their perspective on where the market is, where it has been, where it might be heading, and then answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get the slides pulled up here. Can everybody see my slides yet? I did not hit share screen. There we go. All right, so I titled this Why People Might Buy Certain Vehicles. And it really is just a look at the historical trends that we're seeing in the market. First of all, just a reminder, this is our board of advisors. You can see that it's probably the most diverse organization in the market in terms of who is driving the train and giving us our direction on what research we do. I'm very blessed to be working with these guys because it does give us a great perspective as to where the market is heading. The first thing I want to say is, I'm a history major, so I think we need to look at the market not just from where we're going, but we need to know where we've come from. And if we don't know how we got where we are, we're not going to really understand how we're going forward. And I'm going to take a completely different tack than I usually do. I almost always focus on that top 5%. We always talk about alternatives and what the alternative powertrains are. And then we say, but 98, 97% of vehicles are gasoline powered. And we kind of set that aside and talk about these others. But, we need to spend a little time looking at what's going on in that big block of the 90 to 95, 98% of vehicle sold. Because if we don't understand what's happening there, then we're really missing out on understanding what consumers are looking for. They're not necessarily buying the alternative powertrains en masse, at least not yet, but they're buying different vehicles within this segment that we call the internal combustion engine liquid fuel pool. And so this report we put together is designed to help us understand a little bit more about consumer behavior relative to that area. First of all, you guys have seen my presentations before. I love taking media headlines and tearing them apart. So often we see these headlines, gas prices are killing the SUV. Truck and SUV sales plunge as gas prices rise. Or truck sales are surging because gas prices are low. Low gas prices boost SUVs and pickup sales surge because of low gas prices. And I saw another analysis on the plane yesterday, actually reputable market analysts saying because of gas prices, these vehicles are being sold. And I think we need to peel that back a little bit and look a little more at fundamentals because quite frankly, headlines do not tell the whole story. Unfortunately, a lot of the public reads only the headlines of the first 2 paragraphs of an article. They don't get into the meat of what's really happening. And that's what we try to do at the Institute is provide a little more context. So like I said, this report's due out the end of this month. Looking at vehicle sales and fuel prices, we're going back to vehicle sales by class in 2003 to 2017 and gas prices at the retail level from 2006 to kind of give us an idea of what's happening in the market. And here's where we start. Light-duty vehicle sales since 2003 have really gone through the ringer, and it's largely because of the Great Recession in 2008 through 2010. But you take a look at the number of vehicles sold each year, that is a huge number. Now, today we're looking at new vehicle sales. At some point, we're going to have to look at used vehicles because there were about 39 million used vehicles sold last year. And we need to start paying attention to that a little bit to understand that consumer segment as well. But in terms of the new vehicles, this is what we're looking at. 3 years in a row, 17 million units or more. And according to Wards Auto through April, we're looking at an estimated annual sales of about 17 million again this year if current sales on a monthly basis continue. So we're looking at a pretty diverse market over the last several years, that main dip there in the recession area. But more interesting is we start looking at what vehicles were sold. We hear those headlines, we're a truck culture, we're selling trucks. This is the market share of vehicles by class sold since 2003. And the one thing that stands out more than anything is the growth in that yellow band across utility vehicle. And as we start analyzing what's happening in the market, that vehicle class tells us so much about the consumer, tells us so much about what's happening in the market, and we need to be paying attention to that. It also provides indication as to what strategies might be employed going forward to diversify the fuel and powertrain supply in the market as we go into new technologies. But this one here is probably even more clear indication. If you take a look at this, this is market share by class, by year, grouped together. There's only one segment that has grown consistently, and that is a crossover utility vehicle. Every other segment, their market share is lower than their peak in the last 15 years. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think it's instructive to understand that the market has evolved, and we're seeing the change over time as the consumers are trying to gravitate towards one more consistent type of vehicle rather than the disparity we've seen over the last 15 years. In other words, instead of consumers buying small, mid, large cars and SUVs and trucks, they're starting to come together with more and more consumers buying crossover utility vehicles. If you take a look in 2017, 35% of vehicles sold were within that crossover class. That is a big number. Never have we seen that type of domination of a single type of vehicle in the market. And this is another indication, market share change. The crossover class has gained 25% market share since 2003. Every other class, with the exception of small car, which grew marginally, every other class of vehicle has lost market share in the last 14, 15 years. So when we started thinking about this headline we saw earlier, we really had a question, what are those headlines talking about? And we can look at more recent trends to understand a little bit more, but fundamentally the market has shifted to a more homogeneous type of vehicle preference among consumers. But we also have to keep in mind that Great Recession was a huge market differentiator. That was a time we saw cash for clunkers come on board. We saw complete destruction in buying power of consumers. But if we take a look at what's happened before and after, this chart shows change in market share by class, by period. The orange is before the recession, the brown is after the recession. There's only 3 classes of vehicles that have gained market share since the recession. And those are the larger vehicles. And this is why so many of the headlines are talking about we're a truck culture. We're moving in trucks. Cross utility vehicles are technically regulated as light trucks for purposes of emissions and fuel economy rules. So you start looking at this and seeing that, we start seeing that we have seen a trend in the last years of market share growing for these heavier vehicles. But it's interesting to see that this is shifting consumers. We start thinking about fuel economy standards, thinking about how automakers go to market. They're looking at how do we deliver a vehicle to the consumer that the consumer actually wants to buy. And it's instructive to see where they've been and what they want to do in the future. But there's a huge disconnect between fuel prices and what's happening with regards to what consumers want to buy. Yes, they're related, and there are definitely parallels we can track, but causal factors are very difficult to establish when we really look at the numbers. First of all, gas prices affect the economy. On the left, you see the trend of retail gas prices since 2006, ranging from a low of about $1.55, $1.60 to a high of about $4.11, and then all over the place. Up in the 2011, 2014, then down, and then trending up again right now. On the right side, every month, the National Association of Convenience Stores asks customers, to what extent do fuel prices affect your feelings about the economy? And if you look at this, that yellow line is retail prices observed by the respondents. So that's what they see, that's what they believe to be the price in their market. And then they're feeling that gas prices, yeah, there's some impact or a great impact on my feelings about the economy. And it's almost always about 70%. So we cannot ignore the fact that those big price signs on the corner store are having a daily impact on consumers' mindset with regards to the health of the economy and their ability to spend. And that transitions over to how they approach vehicles purchases. We ask consumers, how do you pick where to buy fuel? And even when prices come down, price is the #1 reason consumers will select one retail station to buy fuel over another. Another indication that price has an influence over people's decisions. Start looking at how they buy cars. That second chart, the bar chart there, is we ask customers, if you're in the market to buy a car in the next couple of years, what is the single most important attribute you're looking for? Cost of the vehicle is the #1. Fuel economy is #2. But look at fuel economy. From 2014 to 2017, the interest in a high efficiency vehicle has dropped tremendously. And that is because prices at the pump have been much lower. When prices at the pump are lower, consumers are still focused on it, still pay attention to it, but the amount of importance it has to the vehicle they purchase does go down, at least in terms of how they rank what's important. Now, another thing to think about is we ask customers to rank these issues. There's another survey by the Auto Alliance that actually asks consumers after they bought a car to rank 1 through 20 what attributes were most influential. Fuel economy ranks down by the bottom of that list. So while consumers are saying, I'm in the market to buy a car, they say, I'm interested in fuel economy, but after they buy a car, they report fuel economy did not have that much of an impact on their ultimate decision. And that's an important distinction. What they tell us will influence their decision and what actually influences their decision is not always the same. That being said, when you think about alternative powertrains, you think about how new technology can save consumers money at the pump, there is a more direct link between fuel prices and what they do. We can use hybrids as an example. In 2014, we asked consumers, would you be interested in buying a hybrid? Gas prices were about $3.60, $3.70 a gallon. We did the survey. About 84% of consumers said, yeah, I'll consider a hybrid. In 2016, retail fuel prices were down below $2, and the number of consumers that, yeah, I'm interested in a hybrid dropped to the low 40 percentile. Sales, same thing. 2014, about 2.5%, 3% of vehicles sold were hybrid. 2016, that number dropped down below 2%. And so when we started thinking about consumers calculating return on investment between the purchase of a high efficiency vehicle with an alternative powertrain, price has a huge impact on what they are interested in doing and what they will do. But when price is being applied to the decision, and the fuel price being applied to the decision regarding what class of vehicle, what size vehicle, the impact is a lot less apparent than it is with terms with alternative powertrains. This is a difficult chart to read, but it kind of shows that the retail price across time versus the sales of vehicle class, if we were to parse this out into each single class, we might be able to tell specific stories. But overall, you see that the percentage rate does not necessarily track, as headlines might suggest, specifically gas prices. When gas prices are going up, we're not seeing the small car, middle car go up appreciably as one might expect. Likewise, when sale prices are going down, we're not seeing truck and SUV go up. The only one we're seeing go up consistently is CUV. So let's take that a little more specifically in this chart. The first half, in 2009 to 2012, gas prices went up every single year. 2012, 2016, gas prices went down every single year. When prices are going up, if we believe the headlines, we would assume that the sales of small cars, middle cars would increase and sales of truck-based vehicles would go down. We did not really see that difference between 2009 and 2012. Market share of those vehicles remained relatively the same. 2012 to 2016, gas prices go down. We see a slight return to what the headlines would suggest in terms of a slight decrease in market share of small and middle-sized cars and a slight increase in SUVs and pickups. We see a significant increase in crossovers. And if we look more detailed, I believe that the crossovers are actually the ones capturing the sales of the small car, middle car, because they compete with those on cost of acquisition and cost of fuel. The other thing we have to pay attention to is every single class of vehicle has improved fuel economy since 2012. There's not a single vehicle class that's not gotten more efficient. And that's important. We start thinking that gas prices have gone down and every single vehicle is more efficient than the one it replaced. We see consumers possibly becoming less sensitive to that relationship between fuel prices and fuel efficiency, because they're getting a more efficient car no matter what they buy than the one they're giving up. And we also have to keep in mind this: there is a diminishing rate of return as we improve fuel economy. Improving the fuel economy on a pickup truck by 2 miles per gallon has a better financial benefit to the consumer than increasing the fuel economy on a small car from 28 to 30 miles per gallon does for the consumer. This chart here shows if we assume gas prices are $3 a gallon and the consumer is driving 13,000 miles a year, we can calculate the savings of improving fuel economy by 2 miles per gallon. On the low side, going from 18 to 20 saves the consumer $216 a year. On the high side, going from 28 to 30, it saves them less than 100. That is an important distinction. A lot of people lament the sales of pickup trucks because it's diminishing or improving the fuel economy. Well, quite frankly, the improvement in efficiency of pickup trucks and the sales of these pickup trucks replacing older trucks reduces our overall consumption of fuel across the board and has a positive impact on emissions, a positive impact on the economy in terms of how many miles we're getting per dollar we spend on energy. But then there's another area. Remember the slide I showed where the number one contributing factor to a person's decision to buy a car is vehicle cost? This is the chart. This is averaging the average MSRP for the top 4 vehicles sold in each class since 2011. What I want to point out here, going back to my discussion about CUVs, which I'll get into a little bit more, is the crossover utility vehicle is not competing on a price with this sport utility or the pickup. It's competing on price with the middle car and the small car. Now think about this. In the 80s and 90s, consumers were buying SUVs because they wanted a higher ride, they wanted more cargo and passenger capacity, maybe they just wanted more safety features and a different ride. But what the automakers realized is by building an SUV on a truck platform, consumers are driving trucks and they weren't getting the fuel efficiency and having to pay a little bit more. Consumers want that space, they want that ride height, they want that safety features, but they don't necessarily need to go off-road or tow anything. So they don't need the truck body. They don't need the truck platform. So the auto company started building crossover vehicles, same type of body structure on top, but built on a car frame. So you get a better ride quality, more fuel efficient, and they can offer them at a lower price point. Those combinations, the CUV competing with the middle car and the small car, is a much more of a informative analysis than saying CUVs are trucks. They are classified as trucks by federal regulations, but they're not viewed in the same way as trucks should be. SUVs and trucks are very different vehicles than a CUV, and a CUV is much more competitive with the car, and that's important to keep in mind as we start thinking about what the future might hold in terms of additional powertrains or additional vehicle models. The other thing you have to look at is consumers can only buy what's available. And so if there's fewer options on the market for a certain class of vehicle, choice is more limited and consumer acquisition of those vehicles will be more limited. Take a look at the number of models sold by a class of vehicle over the last 8 years, and you see that crossovers and luxury cars dominate the market in terms of the number of vehicles. The luxury car segment is interesting because it's only about 1-2% of total vehicles sold. Yet, I think if we think about who the customer luxury model is, they want distinguishing characteristics. They want more options, and the auto companies can make a lot more money on luxury cars, so they can afford to put out more models to satisfy a more selective consumer who's buying those vehicles. The crossover, however, just shows you that you've seen a significant increase in models available. And you look at the use that's been done at the same time as SUVs have gone down, middle cars have gone down, and small cars have lost a little bit of option. Headlines recently, we've got a major auto company in the United States eliminating all but 2 of their car classes that are going to be produced in the car models. They're going to go down to 2 models of cars, and they're going to shift to crossovers, SUVs, and trucks. Another major auto company already did that, down to 3 car categories. And so you're seeing that the auto companies are tailoring their offer to mimic what the consumers say that they want, what the consumers are buying. What's important to note is as they do that, they're creating vehicles that are more efficient and more effective and have a better return on investment for the consumer at a lower price point. So they're satisfying the economic needs of the consumer along with their personal utilitarian needs, and they're starting to shift market focus to satisfy the market. We start thinking about fuel economy regulations. It's important to understand. You can set up the standards for a more efficient vehicle, but if the customer doesn't want to buy it, why did we do it? What's the point? You have no benefit to the economy if we're producing vehicles that the customers don't buy, don't drive. It has no effect on emissions, has no effect on air quality or economic power in the market. And so I said it's all about the CUV. Here's the track and sales in terms of units sold and market share. And it's all because it satisfies that consumer niche. It provides the automakers an opportunity to deliver what the consumer wants with a more efficient vehicle technology to satisfy fuel economy requirements. It allows them to come to market at a lower price point to capture that consumer while still making money on the vehicle. And that is a very important distinction. They have to be able to make money. One of the concerns about the electric vehicle market is I've seen a lot of reports suggesting that the auto companies are losing money on every electric vehicle sold. That is not a sustainable proposition. They need to figure out a way to deliver all their vehicles at a profitable standpoint. Otherwise, they're not going to be around to produce cars in the next 5 years. And so the CUV gives them an opportunity to deliver compliant vehicles, the fuel efficiency that consumers want, and at a price point that consumers want while maintaining their profitability. And so the real takeaway from this is that fuel efficiency is still a top concern, but its intensity has declined as fuel prices have dropped and miles per gallon for a good vehicle has improved. That's something we have to pay attention to. If fuel prices go back up, interest in fuel economy will become more precise. But what we've seen over the past years is that if you're interested in fuel economy, you're not giving up utility. If you need a vehicle that has storage capacity for stuff for your home or for your kids, you're not going to buy a compact car because it's more efficient. You're going to buy a more efficient utility vehicle within that class. So people are likely going to stay within the same class or maybe move from middle car to CUV in order to get the utility they want while maintaining some sort of fuel efficiency and cost basis. Cost of the vehicle is critical in the decision-making process. You know, an extra $1,000 on a vehicle for people in Washington, D.C., which I like to call the ivory tower, $1,000 for a vehicle purchase is not a lot of money. Out in the heartland, it is a huge amount of money and can mean a family can buy or cannot buy a vehicle, or they're going to go from a new car to a used car. They're going to make trade-offs to get what they need at the price they can afford. So MSRP cannot be underestimated in terms of its importance to the consumer. They buy the vehicles that fit their lifestyles and budgets. I already talked about CUVs. This whole idea we're addicted to trucks is only because CUVs are classified as trucks. About 65% of vehicles last year were classified as trucks. 35% of them were crossover utility vehicles or utility-like cars. That is the distinction. We're not necessarily shifting to a truck mentality. Pickup trucks have a certain market, they have certain niche, certain utility that certain customers want. Not everybody wants a pickup truck. Not everybody wants an SUV with the full capacity that they deliver, but going to the crossover utility vehicles. And that is a lesson that we need to think about as we bring new alternative powertrains to market. There is really no causal relationship between fuel prices and what class of vehicle people are buying. I believe there is a strong correlation between fuel prices and interest and acquisition of alternative vehicles, but not in terms of well, fuel prices are low, I'm buying a big heavy duty vehicle, or fuel prices are high, I'm shifting to a lightweight vehicle with more fuel efficiency. These are big capital investments that we're making. The car is the number 2 purchase most families will make behind a house in their lifetime. It's not something they just trade off very quickly unless they're on a lease basis. They're not shifting their utility. Their lifestyle doesn't change because fuel prices go up and down to the extent that they can afford to change out their entire vehicle selection. And most importantly, the message from the Fuel Institute on everything we do is simplistic explanations are usually insufficient. You cannot say people are buying X because of Y. There are so many variables that go into play in terms of what consumers buy and what they don't buy that we have to pay attention to the dynamic of the market. And this report that we're releasing looks at a couple things. It looks at the price of fuel, the price of the vehicles, and the fuel efficiency. Those are 3 elements that are important, but there are other elements, safety features, creature amenities, infotainment systems. All those things go into it. They have different levels of importance at different customers, but they're all important. And we cannot look at anything in a vacuum and try to think that that's going to give us an answer to what consumers are going to do with not going to do. And so with that, I'll open it up to our panel. Let me start off. I'm going to turn it over to this. turn it over to Alan Baum first. Alan, you want to kind of give us an idea of, hold on, I'm trying to get back to this. Who you are, what Baum Associates does, your background, and kind of introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. I've been in the auto industry since the mid-1980s, forecasting for suppliers primarily, finding out that suppliers, and particularly small to medium-sized suppliers, didn't really understand the market they were in. They didn't, if they were the second or third tier, they said, well, we supply to Lear. Well, what else do we need to know? Well, you need to know if you're supplying the Malibu or the Silverado. And so I've been doing that, and over the course of time, focusing on powertrain, and that led to fuel economy and mileage issues. So I'm right in the middle of all this, where are we going with the fuel economy regulations? And as a offshoot of that, alternative vehicles. Obviously, that's a piece of it. So I'm now doing a forecast of that. So I do a lot of forecast and analysis around those kind of issues.
Okay, so from your perspective, what I just kind of walk through and what our upcoming report is, what's your initial reaction to that kind of information, that kind of analysis?
Well, the crossover vehicle issue is absolutely key. And you're absolutely right about the growth of that. One thing, the pickup trucks are going to be a little more cyclical than the rest of the industry. We've been on a long, strong economic growth period, which has helped pickup trucks. But again, as you said, SUVs are not doing as well for the simple reason that the automakers are not putting money into those vehicles. They're putting money into the crossovers. And oh, by the way, those are on the same platform as the cars. Ford, as you didn't say the four-letter word, earlier this week said, no, we're not going to be in cars, except for a few exceptions. In fact, they're the same platforms as the crossovers. And if you look at Honda and Toyota and Nissan, they're not backing away from cars because they're on the same platform. They've already got the development process. More importantly, their plants are more flexible. And Honda is cherry picking all over North America, putting in little units of CRV and HRV, the small and mid, and well, the very small and the small crossovers, in order to improve their availability, while slowly dropping Accords and Civics as necessary, but certainly not backing away. I think this is a very dangerous move by Ford and Chrysler. Now, Chrysler's got a different issue. Their cars simply weren't that popular. But I see them, the Detroit 3 in particular, as potentially losing yet more market share because of backing away from this. Now, obviously, they're looking around the world, and they'll operate appropriately around the world. But in North America, I think that's a real risk.
Hey, John, let's turn to you for a second. Why don't you kind of give us a background on you, Navigant Research? You guys have done several research projects for the Fuels Institute. Kind of give us your kind of background as to what Navigant does.
Yeah, thanks, John. So, yes, Navigant Research is part of Navigant Consulting, a global energy consulting firm, and I've been involved with the organization since 2009, heading up our transportation research, which spans pretty much everything from two-wheeled vehicles up to heavy duty and everything in between. And like our colleague Alan, also in the forecast business, so lots of forecasts for alternative drivetrains, mobility services, and everything in and around the automotive and truck industries. And so I've been working most recently not only with tier one suppliers and the automotive industry as well, but a lot of interest in electrification and understanding what demand for electric vehicles is likely to be and how that will impact society overall. And we've had a lot of utility clients talking to them about how to prepare for electrification, when it should get on their radar, and how they can best deal with the upcoming move towards electrification.
You've done for us, a lot of the work you've done for us, John, is forecasting. And so with this report we have coming out, kind of looking at historical trends, what kind of things do you pull away from this new information that we're trying to put out there?
Yeah, I think it's very accurate and timely for the state of the market today and for the next few years. Really good insights into what is motivating the car buyer of today. And this recent trend analysis and historical perspective is really important. I would caution a little bit when you start thinking about a little further out into the future, that things like model selection will be changing based on changing consumer requirements. And the example, the CUV market, as you mentioned several times, has grown very rapidly, partly because more models, right? Automakers see the trend, oh, consumers like these vehicles, they're profitable for us, let's make more and more, let's make more models. However, there are other trends that are going to be coming up in the next decade or so that may be changing sort of that historical perspective to look more at automation and mobility services and a move away towards personally owned, so that small to medium car market may actually be reducing even more in the future.
I think that as we started thinking about electrification, we started thinking about autonomous or shared mobility, I think it's important that those new vehicles are introduced in a package that consumers want. So we were chatting yesterday, the three of us, about electric vehicles. Look at the market for electric vehicles. Take the Model X out of it, because that's out of the price range for the majority of the consumers. The electric vehicles coming to market are small. They're compact. If consumers want a larger crossover utility type vehicle and the auto companies are just bringing these small compact EVs because that makes sense from a power to weight ratio, is there an opportunity to possibly accelerate the adoption of EVs if they bring them to more popular model types?
Yeah, that's a gap in the market that's been holding the electrification of transportation back because the emphasis has been more on the luxury segment. And then initially there were a few compact, smaller vehicles, the first, like the electric vehicles from Mitsubishi and the Leaf, which only attract a certain class of buyer. It has been a huge gap, which is why we're still 1% to 2% market share for electrified vehicles. We will see a lot more of that. Obviously, it took a while for the German automakers to sort of catch up and really look at what Tesla was doing in stealing market share in the luxury segment and in the large, and now with the Model X in the crossover segment. And we think there's going to be a lot more activity from the OEM perspective in addressing those markets coming forward, especially on the luxury, on the higher price vehicles. Heard announcements from Audi, BMW, Mercedes, all talking about electrifying significant portions of their fleets, and those aren't in the small economy type car category. So that will be part of this evolution if the electrification is going to take hold, is, as you pointed out, really addressing a different market buyer and a different vehicle type.
Alan, what do you think?
Yeah, what we're talking about, you mentioned the shared and the autonomous. Those are obviously electronic intensive. And I don't mean in terms of the propulsion of the vehicle, I mean in terms of the driving of the vehicle. Obviously, semi-autonomous or autonomous is going to be electronic. The distraction available to the driver who doesn't need to focus on driving, that's electronic intensive. And oh, by the way, then you've already got this requirement for power. You can use it to drive the vehicle too. And so that's going to be a tremendous incentive for the automakers to go to PHEVs or BEVs because of the cost of operation. And so obviously that's an issue that the fuel industry can be concerned about and should be concerned about. On the other hand, this isn't going to happen next Thursday. So there is obviously a movement, and but you are going to see the fleets are going to be focused on, okay, what do you want to do between point A and point B? That's the kind of vehicle you would pick as a consumer, not whether it's a Ford or a GM. And obviously the automotive companies are absolutely terrified by this. So they're trying to get into all the different pieces of the business so that they're not selling a car once and never seeing the customer again for 8 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of the analysis and a lot of the suggestions. I mean, take a look at what Bob Lutz said about commoditization of transportation in the future. In 20 years, we're going to be legislated out of the driving seat. It's going to be basically autonomous electric pods. They're going to have no distinguishing characteristics, and the traditional model's gone. I think 20 years on any forecast of anything is way too fast for this industry.
Yes.
So, even with electric vehicles, we're looking in 20 years, 90% of the vehicles on the road will still be ICE dominant. So what I like from the reports I get from you on a monthly basis, Alan, is you look at what each auto company is doing, look at the trends going on with part suppliers. What are the major trends you see coming down the pike in terms of vehicle choice and availability over the next 5 years or so?
Well, as you showed, the SUV, as it's defined as a rear-wheel drive truck, is on the decline. What we're seeing, though, that's interesting is as we move from a car to a crossover world, the auto companies, frankly, and you mentioned used cars. Let's stick to new cars for a minute, and then I'll jump over to used cars. The automakers have no interest in selling low-end vehicles. That's certainly obviously true for luxury makers, but it's true for the mainstream buyers too. And they much rather would sell you, for example, I'll use Honda, where they actually are doing well in both segments. They're going to sell you an Accord. They can make money on that Accord. Obviously, it's a single platform around the world for most of their vehicles. But then they'll be happy to sell you a CRV. And oh, by the way, the prices are really similar. Because of the demand for the crossover, they're going to give you more utility. That's what the crossover allows them to do. It allows you as a consumer to do. But because people are willing to pay more, they're going to be charged more. So what you typically see is somebody going from an Accord to a CRV, not from an Accord to a Pilot, because the CRV is on the price scale similar to the Accord, and the fuel economy is also similar. If you go to the medium-sized crossover, which is larger, you're going to have a penalty in cost and in fuel price because you're going to use a little more fuel, obviously, than you would in the CRV. But the good news for the consumer is that extra utility of the CRV enables you to be very happy with your purchase. So the trick is which automakers, and obviously it's global, are able to make that switch, whereas in other parts of the world, the car is absolutely in demand and they can profit on both. Remember, these are based on the same platforms, so it's just a question of what you put on top of the platform.
So John, what do you think in terms of what the major trends next 5 to 10? Obviously, you guys have done a lot of work on EV adoption, mobility, but we know that those are down the road. What are you guys from Navigant seeing as the dominating trends over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so electrification will continue to get in momentum, again, mostly because of more models in more categories. I think the status quo will continue the most recent trends in terms of the overall categories, other than you'll start to see, and especially in urban areas, more interest in electrification. Part of that continues to be driven, of course, by the ZEV mandate, zero emission vehicle mandates in California and 9 other states, as well as the fuel economy standards. Certainly, most of us joining today are aware of the changes that may be coming down as far as the fuel economy regulations. And one of the things that we've in thinking about this is don't rush to judgment that just because that the fuel economy standards are under review for the years 2022 to 2025 by the current administration, that's going to have big changes in the fleet within that time frame. Those vehicles are already spec'd, they're already built, the manufacturing lines are already planned. Even if there were to be substantial changes in the near-term fuel economy standards, the auto industry can't react quick enough to really make significant changes in its assortment of models that are being offered. So it will be, inertia will keep things more the same, and also what's going to happen with these fuel economy regulations is still very much up in the air. If there are substantial changes requested, the automotive industries had different automakers have had slightly different takes on what they'd like to see happen as a result of that review period. And also litigation may ensue if there were to be, again, significant pullback in the fuel economy regulations. The state of California, other states may come in and try and put that on hold. And so it could quite possibly be that nothing really changes for the next few years until we possibly have a change in the administration or change in policies because of the way the courts may hold things up.
Okay, so and we just got a question come in that's funny. I think I was melding with the audience. I was thinking this too. Tons of news globally about diesel vehicles and diesel fuel. The scandals on emissions cheating that have dominated headlines is making a lot of people think, oh, maybe diesel's over. But what we've seen over the last 2 years, at the very least, is almost a resurgence in diesel availability in the States. We saw a slight increase in diesel sales last year, mostly driven by pickup trucks, but we did see General Motors bring a couple CUV and a passenger car powered by diesel. Jaguar Land Rover did the same thing. Now, John, in the forecast you've done for the Fuels Institute, I think it's diesel stays in the 2.5% to 3.5% market share going forward. Do you see any type of shift in the diesel market with the kind of a revived commitment by some OEMs to bring diesels to market, compared with the almost tangible backlash in the European community?
Right. Yeah. I think the what had happened, as you point out, with the backlash, that was sort of a temporary phenomenon in the way it impacted the U.S. market. Definitely more pronounced impact and more sustained impact in Europe as diesel, has become basically a four-letter word there in terms of fuel economy regulations and emissions impact. However, as you said, the field for higher fuel economy vehicles, especially in the CUV category, now it incrementally goes up year over year in gasoline vehicles, but now diesels are starting to have more of a role. As you said, looking at that trend going upwards over time, that fuel economy continues to creep up. Well, diesels are an option. They offer, in general, higher fuel economy than gasoline vehicles. So I don't think the knee-jerk reaction period of being anti-diesel is somewhat passing by us here in the U.S., and the automakers are responding to that. As long as certainly there's no more further investigations and that automakers are able to comply with standards with their diesel offerings.
So, Alan, what do you think? 'Cause, I mean, I look at the diesel customer as a very passionate consumer who's not going to just shift. If you're a diesel consumer, likely you're going to continue to be a diesel consumer. Now, the car segment's different, but in the light truck segment, clearly. And then we've seen some breakthroughs in terms of there's new technology that might become the market that can eliminate NOx emissions. We haven't figured out the particulate matter emissions, but are you seeing a trend back towards diesel from some of the OEMs, or what do you anticipate to happen there?
Well, Bosch literally announced this week that they have a new technology. Now, this is obviously very much, in their favor. They have a lot to gain by this working well. But more importantly, BMW and Mercedes and VW are, of course, major Bosch customers. And BMW and Mercedes have both said they're not willing or really wanting to walk away from the diesel market. And the point is, again, let's put the U.S. aside. The European Union fuel economy requirements are growing, and they're growing year by year at a greater pace. They need diesel. Okay, maybe you can't drive to the Eiffel Tower with your diesel vehicle, but you can certainly drive around the suburbs of Paris and beyond. The other thing about BMW and Mercedes is that they've got a little more money to play with from the consumer point of view because they're offering higher end vehicles, and they can defray the cost of diesel. So I'm very much expecting to see diesel come back a little bit in Europe. I don't so much expect it in the US because it was the calling card of VW. I think that ship has sailed. That was where they were going to get some volume that they wouldn't otherwise get. So we're not going to see diesel in the medium car area, but we will certainly see it in the truck and the SUV area and the crossovers. I mean, little baby steps. The Equinox and the Terrain are going to have diesel on them. They already do, actually. Very importantly, the F-150 and the Silverado and Sierra within the next 2 to 3 months are going to have 3-liter V6 diesel engines with joining FCA, Chrysler, in the Ram. So we're going to see more diesel.
Yeah, and I agree. I think in the pickup truck market, it's particularly, the Ram 1500 came out of diesel. They had like a 30% take rate when they expected a 10. but they saw a huge increase in customers buying diesel beyond what they expected. The new F-150, as you alluded to, they're reporting 30 miles per gallon. You've got the light-duty truck from GM, the Colorado and the Canyon, both got Motor Trend Truck of the Year as diesels. So you have this, then you have it going into the SUV and CUV category. I think there's tremendous opportunity for diesel on the market if we can figure out that particular key.
And oh, by the way, when you put a diesel on, you improve your retention value, which allows for lower leases. It also, the buyer's often very aware of the payback, and they're willing to pay for it. And guess what the automakers do? They package not just the diesel engine, but a whole ton of equipment with it, which is very profitable. So the big grins on the face of the automakers when they sell you a diesel, or for that matter at Ford, they sell you an EcoBoost, is they package a bunch of equipment and they make a lot more money.
Yeah. So we're kind of running up on the end of the hour. So John, I'll turn it over to you for a last comment. If we're looking down the road 5-10 years, what should we be paying most careful attention to as indicators of what the future market of transportation and transported energy might look like down the road?
Yeah, in the 10-year time frame, we're going to start seeing much more penetration of these mobility services. Everybody's familiar with how ride-hailing services, Uber and Lyft, are pretty ubiquitous in any major metropolitan area. And they're starting to have an impact in that millennials who don't have the same sort of innate car bias of wanting to own a vehicle and wanting the freedom that entails, that's not carried on to this millennial generation in the same way it has in previous generations. And so you're starting to see people in San Francisco and New York and Boston coming in after they graduate college, not getting a driver's license, or delaying their car purchases, or just going without a car. And then many 20-somethings are starting to just give up a car because in those congested urban areas, the price of parking is very high. The availability of these services are becoming just really pervasive. And so it's easy if you live in one of these cities to get around whenever you need to, as long as you stay within that urban area without actually owning a vehicle. And so it's starting to have some incremental impact in vehicle registrations in some of the major cities themselves, but we'll see more of that trend in that 10-year horizon when you start to see more and more of these services. And then when you add automation into the mix, when the cost of these services starts going down considerably as the drivers are eliminated, then they become more cost competitive, not only with mass transit, but also really serving that last mile and getting more of the urban dwellers. So I see there's going to be more of a separation between urban buyers and rural buyers in the penetration of cars overall and the familiarity of using these services. So we're really thinking that towards the second half of the 2020s, the overall car market in the US is going to start shrinking, particularly in these concentrated urban areas where mobility services are going to fill those gaps.
And I think that's an interesting, because I think there are several dynamics playing into that. One, there's forecasts that in 10 years of autonomous vehicles being approved, 95% of all vehicle miles traveled is going to be shared autonomous on-demand services. That's impossible. But I have seen other studies where Generation Z and Y, those consumers who have used ride-hailing services, 64% now question if they will need a car in the future. And so I think the urbanization trends we're seeing, I think the demographic shift and the generational shift we're seeing, timed with advanced technological improvements, I can see these mobility services popping up in different markets at different times. Not ubiquitous, not across the nation, not everybody, but definitely having a viability in certain communities with certain demographics.
Yeah, agree. And one thing not to overstate also is the automation piece. Obviously, there's a lot of automated technologies out there for safety that are coming in now, level 1 and 2 automation. And of course, we've had some unfortunate accidents where people have misused the technology and not paid attention. That is a real setback for the industry. So I know Ford, Nissan, others have said, well, we can have fully automated vehicles ready to go in the market by 2021, 2022. We're not that's actually going to happen from a regulated standpoint, that it's going to be permissible that regulators will enable that to happen, just because there's still more testing to be done. The technology still needs to evolve and improve to allow that full-time, hands-free vehicle driving itself scenario. And so, yes, automation is coming. It's great, but don't expect that major shift to start happening in the next 5 years.
And, you know, Alan, you wrote some analysis about a year or two ago about the impact of mobility services and fleet operators on overall vehicle sales, and kind of raised the point that the typical consumer drives 10 to 15,000 miles a year. Those cars last 10, 15, 20 years. Your service drivers driving 50 to 100,000 miles a year, turning those cars over more frequently, so it may not have a huge impact on overall units sold. What's your thinking in terms of the mobility trajectory, and overall in the next 10 years, what are going to be the biggest distinctions of the new market?
Well, I would say I was going to answer perhaps a different question than you asked.
Okay.
But I lost your audio there right at the end. The fuel demand could potentially be greater, even with fewer vehicles, because, as you were alluding to, these vehicles will be used more because they will be part of a fleet service. On the other hand, they would run out for suppliers. Suppliers would have to make a better vehicle that has more durability, because the vehicle might be used 30% of the time in a day as opposed to 5 to 10%, which it is now. But again, going back to the base, if there's more travel, there's more fuel used, and as long as that fuel isn't electricity, the Fuel Institute is happy about that. Some of that will be electricity, but the other big issue going forward is the cost of the vehicles in the various categories. And what I mean by that is electrics are going to come down, plug-in hybrids are going to come down, ICE vehicles are going to come up because of the content in fuel economy. Hybrids are going to kind of wiggle around because they'll come down a little bit with the batteries, a little bit more up with the ICE. And of course, you have the safety issues, the electronics that are going to add cost. The issue is, what is the relative cost of these different types of vehicles? And how does that affect the consumer and the fleet owner as we go to semi-autonomous and autonomy? And if it in fact costs less to drive, in part because we have some autonomy and you take the driver out of the equation, we potentially have a real problem, and that is more vehicle miles traveled and potential increase in congestion, when in fact we're expecting and hoping that it will reduce the congestion. And obviously there's a lot of work going into that, because frankly nobody knows.
You know, and I think that last point is a critical one. We start moving into these autonomous and mobility service providers, but until, and it's going to be very US centric, until Americans learn to share and don't object to sitting in a car with a stranger, congestion's not going to get better. The emissions are not going to necessarily improve as dramatically as we might think of a shared service could provide. There needs to be a cultural shift. And with that, I'm going to turn back over to Donovan in a minute. But gentlemen, thank you guys very much for joining us today. Everybody listening, I encourage you, check out Baum Associates, check out Navigant Research. They're doing great work analyzing the market, great resources if you want to know what to think about going forward. So with that, John, Alan, thank you very much. And Donovan, I hand it back to you.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, John. And thank you also, John. We will have this webinar recorded for everyone. And if you'd like to review it again, it will be available sometime in mid-May, as it will come out with the release of the research that the Fuels Institute is doing. So again, thank you, and be on the lookout for the next Fuels Institute contributor-only webinar. Thank you again.